when Framestore had done this, one of the things they did as part of the marketing of the film, and I just want to call this out, give it a shout out in particular to Rocket and his friends, they produced a bunch of test footage, which I really love how Framestore does this at the moment in their breakdowns, but they clearly use it in their process too. They have a faux photography studio, with the backdrop and with grey ball, chrome ball, and Macbeth chart, and with the character test animation. Now, as I understand it, these were done post the process, but they worked so well for showing the process, that James Gunn was tweeting them out as well. And I just see them all the time in Framestore's breakdowns and in their workflows. It's awesome. Really great way to communicate to the public, to the movie-going public, that this is the work of artists creating animation, Anyway, I'm sure you'll be showing them in the edit, Hugo, but they're super fun.
This podcast is brought to you by Backlight. Backlight Creative enhances the entire creative project lifecycle. For pre-production, there's Celtics. For scriptwriting, beatboards, shot lists, and planning. And Backlight Gem, a narrative design platform for games and VR. For post-production, we've got F-Track Studio to manage creative projects with custom pipelines and reviews with CineSync and F-Track Review for high-res, real-time media collaboration. To manage your assets, connect your own storage to Iconic, a scalable cloud-based media asset management platform. You can learn more at backlight.co. And now on to the show.
I am Groot. I am Groot. I am Groot. I am Groot. I am Groot.
Thank you so much, Ian. How are you doing today?
Yeah, good, thanks. Really good. Great to see you, Hugo. Really excited to talk about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, as I mentioned in my introduction there. This is a film that both of us really love. We've been hanging on a bunch of extras being released so that we can talk about this and show as much as we can from the film. I think Hugo's still recovering from my brilliant introductory joke there, but we'll persevere. Before we get started on this episode, we of course want to thank our sponsors, our subscribers, the general public who watches VFX Notes, and anyone who likes and subscribes us who's a big friend of ours, right, Hugo?
Yes, absolutely. We couldn't do the show without all the support that we get every month in Patreon from our sponsors and also, of course, the people that watch. We always get some lovely messages and a lot of comments. Thank you so much for sending in them over. Keep sending them. Ask us questions. We try to answer as much as we can, so we try to communicate as much as we can. It's great. Thank you so much for all the love out there.
Yeah. In particular, we like when you ask us questions about our rants. And there will be a mini rant on this episode. I'm not going to tell you what it's about, but there will be one. So get ready. Hugo, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, I need to tell everyone straight up that I went to the movies, saw this at a press screening when it came out, and I cried. Yeah. That is the effect of this movie. Yeah. And somehow, despite a few of the trailers coming out and realizing that it was kind of like tying up James Gunn being involved in the Marvel Universe and this story coming to a bit of an end, I don't think I was ready for the way that this dealt with Rocket in particular, but also the gang, the Guardians. And really, I just wanted to say that up front in terms of how much this film affected me. Of course, I just had a really fun time too. Yeah. But what's your initial reaction to this film when you saw it?
Yeah, it was the same thing as well. I cried as well. And I believe it's the first time I cried on a Marvel movie, which is a bit weird. I think that is really the power of how emotional the film can become. And yeah, no, I'll be very honest, and no disrespect to James Gunn and everyone that was involved. I had no expectations whatsoever. I I actually didn't thought it was going to be good. I thought it was just going to be just because, like Marvel lately has been a bit disappointing. And so I thought, just going to be another Marvel movie coming out with some silly stuff. I wasn't expecting it to be so powerful and to be so poignant and to actually be like a great conclusion of the trilogy. I always felt these films, The Guardian of the Galaxy, really stand on their own, and that's why I love them so much, because they don't have this weight of the Marvel universe, that it has to connect with everything. I think James Gunn did great on that, where they're so far away from everywhere, so far away from Earth, they don't have to care about Iron Man and Thor and this, which is great. It's fantastic that they are so disconnected. Kind of reminds me a bit of Doctor Strange, the first one as well, where it was very disconnected from everything else, and it can live as a film by itself, and definitely this trilogy can live by itself. But you're right, like, it's such an emotional thing. I don't know if it was because I love pets, I love dogs and cats and every pets, and I'm a long-time vegetarian, as everyone knows, and so this film really hit it hard on me, because the entire thing, and of course, I hope you've seen the film, but spoilers alert, of course, but the entire film and all the experiments that you see with the animals and the entire, it's just really, really painful to watch, and it really reminds me of all the way animals are treated around the world. So, yeah, the film is really powerful. I was not expecting that at all, so, yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean about disconnected, as in it can be its own story.
Yeah.
But of course, James Gunn did a great job of still connecting the Guardians, of course, to the Avengers.
Yeah.
And also probably elevating the story of the Avengers by having this rogue group who are allowed to be silly, right? And funny. And that's permeated through the whole trilogy, even in the most poignant moments of this film.
Yeah.
I mean, just things that Drax says, or things that, Rocket still says as he's on his deathbed almost.
Yeah.
I just think, by having 3 films and also the other films that the Guardians are in, James Gunn and Marvel have built up a rapport with these characters, and it's the reason we feel emotional in this film when things happen. Exactly. And actually, I mean, not to jump straight to the end, I kind of felt like they could have killed off more of them, right? Like, I think they could have killed off Quill, and it would have been even more meaningful. But maybe the emotion was already there with the animals and the testing.
Yeah,
But,
I know what you mean, because he should have died.
He should have died.
He should have straight up died. No, but you're absolutely right. I think it's because James Gunn has this power of converting something that no one cared about at all. Like these characters were not known. No one knew what it was. The only reason I knew even what Rocket was because there's one of my favorite fighting games in the PlayStation 3, which is called Marvel vs. Capcom 3. And on that game, there's a Rocket Raccoon on the game, which you can play, and he's really cool, and he's a really great character to play with. That is the only way I even knew about this character. So besides a very obscure game from the PlayStation 3, I don't think anyone really knew what Rocket was, or Drax, or any of these characters. And it's testament to how James Gunn can pick up something so obscure and make it even bigger than the other ones. Like in some way, Guardians of the Galaxy is even like larger than the other more mainstream Marvel movies, which is fascinating. And I'm so now looking forward to see what he does with the DC Comics, because imagine what he can do with all the obscure characters that DC Comics has, because they have some obscure stuff over there that never were really... Because, people always think, oh, Superman, Batman, but there's like a barrage of characters that you can play with. So I think... And it's the comedy, right? Like, he's such a he's such a funny director and such a funny writer as well. But and his brother is great as well. And I think it just brings this levity and this comedy together with some drama. It's just a really skilled director working with this material. he's on the top of his game, and I think James Gunn is I think these are the best movie. This is the best movie Marvel has done from the entire MCU. That's my feeling. Even better than the Avengers, because I just feel that I love, this is personal taste, of course. I love films that are a bit comical, but also highly dramatic. You know, I love that combination. That's a combination that, for me, for example, there's another director that does that really well, which is Ricky Gervais. You know, he does that really well with his TV shows, and he can combine this very sad and very funny moment into one single production, and especially his last TV show is absolutely amazing on that sense. And again, you laugh a lot and then you cry, and that is something that I love to see on films. And yeah, so testament to James Gunn really here, and his team, of course, because he did something really cool.
He did, and maybe the James Gunn factor is part of this as well, which is casting.
Yeah.
What's written on the page and what's been directed is amazing, but the characters are what we've fallen in love with this series and this film. And we do love Zoe Saldana. We do love Chris here. We do love computer-generated characters.
Yeah.
I mean, CG has been getting this bad name for a while in different ways, but we are highly attuned to the emotions of Rocket and the emotions of Groot, and they're, synthetic characters. Of course, the actors playing them, Sean Gunn on set and Bradley Cooper for the voice of Rocket, and, usually some amazing stand-in for Groot, they're doing great jobs too, those actors. But I think I just want to really put that line in the sand right now, that visual effects, the CG animation, the CG work, the digital visual effects work, the practical effects work, is doing a huge amount of lifting in Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah.
And, we all know that, but I really want to celebrate it. And that's why we're doing an episode on this show, on this film, I think.
I know. And it's almost like in a future distant, it's probably going to be a distant future when this happens. But Rocket, for me, like, the performance is so outstanding that it could have been really like an Oscar-nominated performance.
Agreed.
And then again, it would have been funny, right? Because you couldn't have just one name. You would have to have the entire crew at Framestore that worked on the project, plus Bradley Cooper, plus Gunn's brother. Like, the whole, like, it would have to be like a big list on the paper when they put up the award. It would be like a roll coming down with all the names. And the award goes to blah, 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 blah. And they would say everyone. It's really a testament for how powerful this performance is. And I feel like all of them, this is the franchise that gave us Dave Bautista, which we never even knew could act, and he's amazing. He's such a good actor.
He's amazing.
He's so funny, and yeah, it's I think you're right. It will become legendary, and this casting and these characters are really powerful, and they are pretty much as powerful as all the other very important MCU figures like Iron Man and Thor, and the ones from the beginning, Black Widow, all the ones from the original MCU, the original lineup of Avengers. I really enjoyed the film. But the only thing that I would, this is not a criticism, it's maybe just like something that I can't really have to say. Like, I just only felt that the film might have been a bit too long. That was the only thing I felt.
Right.
Like, I think 2 hours and a half is a bit of a push. And not that it didn't pass well, it passed really well. And I don't think there's anything that you could really edit out, but there was a lot to do. The film had a lot of acts, and it had a lot of things to show. So it became a bit too long. That was the only criticism I would say. I feel like films are getting too long lately. I think they need to be a bit shorter. I kind of miss the films of 90 minutes and 120 minutes and 120 minutes, but that's a really soft criticism. I think everything else is really fantastic. Like, the animation is some of the best animation I've ever seen. Some of the best music choices I've seen in a long time on an action movie. Like, but he's always like that. He's almost like he has like this almost Tarantino talent of picking the best song for that perfect moment, and then completely synchronizing it with the action. He did that on Suicide Squad as well, not only here.
It's really interesting. The 80s thing plays into the Guardians stuff, mostly because of that's when Quill it was a kid.
Yeah.
And like he's got the tape from his mother, all that. So it is very story related. But it's sort of funny that the 80s thing is allowed to like continue throughout the whole series. I love it, and it means they can use those songs and later songs as well. So yes, a huge part of the series there.
Yeah.
I think we should dive into some of the visual effects work, Hugo. And you mentioned Rocket. The thing about Rocket, as we say, is that he is brought to life by amazing actors. That's Sean Gunn on set and Bradley Cooper. But in terms of his behavior and his animation, well, the overarching person there is Steph Ceretti, good friend of the podcast.
Yeah.
Was the visual effects supervisor on Guardians 1 and now on Guardians 3. Chris Townsend was the soup on Guardians 2. Steph Ceretti clearly has a hand in how all this gets done. But he, in the first film, had Framestore do, pretty much all of Rocket. In subsequent films, including the Avengers films, Rocket is mostly done by Framestore, but other facilities do Rocket as well. And we've talked previously about how it's amazing, really, that these different visual effects studios, like 4, can work on the same character and produce, really similar results. Of course, overseen by a production suit. But I think the history of Rocket is fascinating. Like it's both based on a raccoon, like a real raccoon, but then given that anthropomorphic look and feel. I mean, just give me your thoughts about Rocket in this film, Hugo.
Yeah. Just before I do that, I just wanted to do a little bit of appreciation for Steph Ceretti. Steph, of course, a great friend of the show. He's been on the show already, so you can go and watch that. But if you're listening, Steph, I must say, it's amazing that now you've worked on my 3 favorite Marvel movies ever. And that's a sign of things, I love Doctor Strange, and I love, of course, Eternals, as everyone knows, and everyone keeps pointing out to me that I shouldn't love it. And now this film as well. He has produced some of the most stunning visual effects that Marvel has produced so far. Testament to his QC and to his creative input, and to also the quality that he produces. And I can't wait to see more films from him. Steph is doing an amazing job, and of course now I can't wait to see what he's going to produce now more with James Gunn and with other directors as well. But yeah, it's just mind blowing, the quality on display here, and this film has some outstanding visual effects, really. But just wanted to give it a little bit of love and a bit of appreciation to Steph here.
Love it.
But regarding Rocket, I mean, I already said it. I feel like it is, without a doubt, you really get attached to this character from the very beginning, from the first film. On the first film, of course, we didn't really dive into the story of him at all. We just didn't really knew what he was. It was just this really harsh, balls-busting dude that would just, kill everyone with a big gun and loved mechanic stuff. And it's been, being constructed over the time of the trilogy, how the character becomes more and more, more about the character. But in terms of visual effects, I mean, what can I say? It shouldn't work because it's ridiculous. It shouldn't work. You should look at it and say, this is absolutely trash. This is ridiculous. A raccoon talking with a gun. It really shouldn't work, and it's those kind of things that work really well on a page of a cartoon. But somehow, Framestore and Steph and the entire VFX team made it so that it actually works in a full real environment, and you still believe that he exists. And I think that's really fascinating, because it shouldn't really work.
Yeah, that's right. He's a character that does a lot of action, so he's basically human-like, and then in this film they get the chance, of course, to do different ages of Rocket, and that includes baby rockets, or baby Rocket and baby raccoons. I mean, the cute factor is enormous. when I talked to Framestore about that, one of the things that was really interesting was just to work out what different stages of Rocket look like. They sort of did this very crude morphing between the different stages of it. If you go to beforesanafters.com and search for Guardians Volume 3, there's a heap of articles there just showcasing the different studios, including Framestore. And that was really fun to think that that was a way that they could sort of accurately, model different sizes and ages of Rocket, but make sure that it could properly blend between him. Because the point is, he's being experimented on, and he's kind of going from a normal raccoon to something that's bipedal and something that, there are metal pieces inserted into him and all that sort of thing. So they tried to do something that wouldn't make the audience think, oh, that's not the same character, by blending between them. I thought that was quite clever.
Yeah, the blend shape technique was, and they weren't really didn't really knew that it was going to work, and it worked really, really well, actually. I believe that they did 5 stages. I think it was 5 or 6 stages. Yeah. It's a really cool breakdown. I'm going to put it up while we're talking. And the funny thing as well is, like, there's some stages that are quite grotesque as well. Like, there's some moments where, where Rocket is like, you can kind of see the hole where he has on the brain, and there's like cutaways, and there's like sections when he first does the operation, and then you put him on the jail, and he's like really shivering, and he's like with a lot of damage, and then you see the other creatures as well. It's really strange how the art direction on this really worked, because in the photorealism as well, because they are super grotesque and they are really, really ugly, but they're also cute as well at the same time. There is just something that is fascinating how they've merged cuteness and horrifying experiments in one single thing. And it's really, really fascinating, but also very sad as well, because a lot of animals pass through these things. And there's a lot of, if you follow PETA and if you follow certain Twitter accounts and Twitter for animal rights, you can kind of see some photos, and I'm sure they had to research some of these photos too, which is a really, really painful thing, of course, to do. But yeah, no, they did an amazing job to try to build. I really felt it was always the same character, for sure, from the very beginning. And I think it has to do with the eyes, and it has to do with the facial expression. Of course, he becomes stronger and he becomes like harsher as he becomes older, but you can still feel the same eyes. And I feel that was the trick that Framestore in the direction really, really pointed into the eyes all the time. We had a lot of close-ups that really kind of connected between the shots, and you notice that Jim Gunn's always morphs when we're really close to the character. And in fact, that there's even a really cool scene where he's flying away, he's like racing to his freedom on the spaceship after his friends are dying, and you see the younger raccoon, and then suddenly he becomes older and older, morphs really slowly as he's driving the ship, and you see his face changing, but the eyes are always the same. I think it's the eyes, and I think it's a really well constructed thing that really makes you believe that it's the same character.
Yeah.
That morph is really, that seamless morph, really, you don't even notice that it's a morph. You're just watching, you don't even realize.
Yes, and because these films have been released over a couple of years now, even the work in this third film is just so top-notch compared to the first film. Framestore has gone through a couple of renderers. I mean, basically an Arnold version in the first film to their own renderer called Freak. And, they've also been developing their fur tools and hair tools, grooming tools. And so things really are looking incredible out of Framestore there. Framestore also worked on, of course, Hugo, Rocket's friends.
Yeah.
And these are also the emotional scenes when they're getting to know each other in the cages. This is Lila and Teefs and Floor, and then a bunch of other animals as well that we do see in the film. But the interesting thing about that is all those techniques to do character animation and hair and fur and metal pieces come into play. But I thought the fascinating thing is that the way James Gunn realized those scenes was via a virtual production quasi motion capture method, right?
Yeah, exactly. I have a quote here from James Gunn that I wanted to say. We talked about this. He says, "I want to shoot the scenes in the cages the same way I shoot everything in film." And that was the main thing. So I don't know if everyone realizes, but this film does not have mocap, actually.
No.
It's all hand animated. This is something that Steph very proudly says on all these interviews and all these podcasts. And really a testament to how much animation can really bring into a film, apart from mocap, because I've been there as well. I've used mocap a few times. Mocap is good and it's cool, but never really delivers the entire thing, and you always have to end up doing animation anyway on top. It's a misconception that people think that mocap just magically gives you a performance. It doesn't really. So I can understand why they decided to do a hand animation, because this is such a powerful and such a strong story. So it deals with so many moments that are so cute, and also some when they're playing, all of them on the cage, but also moments of levity and moments of grief as well, when they're looking at the sky and thinking they're going to be free, or even when they die as well. So you kind of have to do more extreme animation. You have to hand animate, because you need to like get hold of certain emotions, just like an actor does when they're doing a really, really good performance after a few takes, you know. So, but yeah, going back to how it was shot, the reason why they decided to do a virtual production shoot, this was 2 days, was really because James Gunn wanted to plan and also to frame all the shots like if it was real. So the suits and the camera being in mocap was more to do with having the camera tracked than anything else, and also to have the performances, because the actors were the actual actors from the voice of those characters, except of course Rocket, which some parts were in the end some parts when he was really young they kept Gunn's voice, but other parts were completely replaced by Bradley Cooper later. But it became this intimate, and it was such an important scene, it became this intimate shoot, almost like an independent movie shoot, where they have four actors doing this entire scene very quietly on a closed set, on a room, and they could really experiment with the cameras, they could experiment with the emotional tone of the film and all the voices, and then that becomes a really amazing reference and starting point for the animation team. Yeah. Because then you have this film, this mini short film, that they've shot.
Exactly. And I imagine it's almost, I imagine for the actors it was a bit like a stage play.
Yeah.
Because they could, be very free where they could go. But then, of course, James Gunn and his team could edit it.
Yeah.
Because there's footage.
Yeah.
And then there's also a virtual camera side to that as well, that can be played with. And then it was handed over to Framestore, who are basically one of the top-notch character animation studios, really, visual effects studios.
They are,
out there, as we've talked about, who, there were actually essentially live-action sets here in, cages that have been scaled up, and that could be used to some degree as well. But effectively, Framestore is doing, of course, fully CG creatures and characters and environment builds as well, where necessary. But yes, the virtual production shoot was a bit of a surprise, actually. I watched the film and then, a few little featurettes and photos from Gunn's Instagram came out. And that was like a really nice surprise to see those actors playing Lila, Teefs and Floor in their, grey mocap suits.
Yeah, it was. Which of course, some people might think that was how they was captured. Definitely wasn't. It was hand animated. But I feel like it. I completely understand why James Gunn wanted to do that, and because it's such an important part of the film, and it really needed a lot of experimentation and some time to really go through the film. And instead of, if this wasn't have done, if they didn't do this, for example, if they would have just relied on pure animation and pure animatics and pure CG, I really strongly think that it would not be as relevant and it wouldn't be as powerful. I'm not like saying that if it was full animation, of course there are some full CG things that are very powerful, but it's more difficult. That's what I mean. It takes you a lot longer to get there because, of course, you have to animate first, and then first you need to say what the animator should do, and then the animator does it, and then you render it, and then you watch it, and then you give notes, and then you render it, and you watch it, and you give notes, and it becomes very sterile. It becomes very difficult to have an emotional connection or an emotional attachment to that because it's just dailies. You're just watching versions.
Yeah.
And then you sometimes could get stuck on certain things that are not even important for the story. You could get stuck with certain animation parts. And then you get stuck on this loop of just watching that shot over and over. And it doesn't work. You just take longer. I feel that this would have just taken longer. In this case, we have a short film, pretty much. It's already cut, it's already edited, already has the tempo that it should have, and it helps Framestore so much because then they know exactly how many frames they need to do on each shot, and they already have a huge guide from the voice and from the actor's performance, and then they can basically use the actor's performance and take that performance in its essence and apply it to a character that has completely different proportions, completely different sizes, but the essence of that performance is there. And I think that's why it works so well, and that's why it's so powerful, and that's why both of us, grown men, were crying on the cinema with this section, I think that's really why.
I wonder too if it's a bit of a reaction from a director and from Steph, maybe, where this might normally have been done with just a voice track and previs or an early animatic.
Yeah.
And that is just as tricky to create as some sort of final animation process, but they're not as connectable, not as... James Gunn can watch the edit with his actors and connect with it emotionally. Previs is just a harder thing to do, and you've also got to sit behind a previs artist and direct them, essentially, to do it. So gosh, they use previs a lot in these films, so it's not a diss on previs at all, or post-viz, or any kind of viz work. But it's just a really smart thing to do. There's been some other films, I feel like, where they've sort of brought the characters in who are going to be virtual and put them in the round. I remember in Rango, the animated film, they did this with some of the main actors.
That's right.
And then, there's other scenes in big films where they've done this. But it seemed to work really well.
Well, I guess it's not really similar, but it's somehow similar. You can kind of see how James Cameron is doing it on Avatar and Avatar 2, because he is also building an entire film on the stage without even thinking of animation still. He's just doing it, and then he thinks about animation later. I mean, I'm not saying, none of us, not you or me, are saying that it's better or worse. We spoke about this on the podcast many, many times. I still firmly believe that the best filmmaking these days happens when you have a practical component and a digital component, and they work together in tandem. And I think this is a perfect example of that, where they shot something that was an incredible reference for the digital side of the team to pick up and to then build. And both are completely important, and both sides are super important. And if you just did it with just mocap, you wouldn't have reached the same emotional tone, because you would have missed some of the finer tones of the performance, because they were not really possible to transfer to a body of these animals. And then if you only did animation pure, you probably wouldn't reach the same emotional resonance, because you probably would have spent too much money, too much time, and you've taken way too long to even get to that place. So I think by combining these two, you get the best of both worlds. You do it a little bit faster, you get more emotional tone, and you can work together as a team. And there's also more creative heads inputting into this. And I feel like that's why it works. That's at least my opinion.
When Framestore had done this, one of the things they did as part of the marketing of the film, and I just want to call this out, give it a shout out in particular to Rocket and his friends, they produced a bunch of test footage, which I really love how Framestore does this at the moment in their breakdowns, but they clearly use it in their process too. They have a faux photography studio, with the backdrop and with grey ball, chrome ball and Macbeth chart, and with the character test animation. Now, as I understand it, these were done post the process, but they worked so well for showing the process, that James Gunn was tweeting them out as well. And I just see them all the time in Framestore's breakdowns and in their workflows. It's awesome. Really great way to communicate to the public, to the movie-going public, that this is the work of artists creating animation, Anyway, those I'm sure you'll be showing them in the edit, Hugo, but they're super fun.
Yeah, they are. And I think it has to do with the fact the lighting of them is so normal, because it's a studio where they're just walking around and moving around and sometimes hitting the camera, and it becomes so much believable. I think it really, it's like you said, really big praise for Framestore, because I keep asking all the VFX people that I meet in all the companies to try to communicate with the audience a bit better in terms of breakdowns and in terms of communicating how CGI is made, because of course we know how much confusion the general public has to how things are done and how they think certain things are real and they're not, and certain things shouldn't be. Like, there's so much confusion and so much anger sometimes towards CGI, and I think Framestore is doing amazing work to try to turn that tide and try to explain that in a more simplified method, because that's what we need. Like, we need the visual effects industry to use more simple methods to explain these things, because I'll give an example, like breakdowns, which we love, you love, I love, most people in the industry love. The people outside the industry, they sometimes don't really understand what they're watching. When they see the lines and they see the things appearing and showing layer by layer, they're not really sure what they're watching. Sometimes, especially when they do split screens and you have 4 images. I was thinking about that just recently when DD launched this amazing breakdown of Extraction 2, and I was watching it, and I was talking with someone that wasn't from the industry, and they didn't even understood the 4 screens. When you see just the CG, and then you see just the particles, and then you see just the plate, they couldn't really understand what was going on, because they don't know these layers come in black or come with an alpha channel. They know what an alpha channel is. None of these people know what these things are. So anything the companies can do to use a more creative way of showing a breakdown would be much appreciated, because it just really brings confusion to the audience. The same way that we did a few episodes ago, we did All Quiet on the Western Front, and their breakdowns also were fascinating for people like me or you, but they were so hard to understand. They were like really tiny thumbnails and like little lines that passed through.
Yes, I think they were. We've talked about this on the podcast. It was a bit deliberately obfuscating what the work was.
And so, having said that, all of that, just to say that Framestore is doing God's work here. They're doing amazing to try to show another side of visual effects and trying to show it in a more fun way that can definitely become a bit more viral on TikTok and more viral on Shorts, and especially on Twitter. It gets a lot of hits, it gets a lot of views, and I really think this is what all these companies need to do. They need to do more creative methods of showing this.
I'm so glad you said that. A big shout out to the marketing team at Framestore for rendering them or getting them rendered in portrait mode, because that of course suited TikTok, and of course they did that on deliberately.
And that's that's not cheap. Really, shout out to them, because it's not cheap. You have to get artists booked. You have to get rendering time to do that, and no one is paying that. No one is paying for that. Probably the studio is not paying for that, and no one is. Is Framestore doing it probably on downtime? But it's so powerful because it really elevates their. Not just the company, but the messaging, but also it probably will help them get nominated if they get nominated to all the award season, to all the many awards,
I have 2 things I really want to say about breakdowns, seeing as we're on that path, Hugo. The first thing was about, you mentioned confusing for the general public, and I think the more people see them, the better they will understand them, and obviously when it's like a blue screen comp or something like that. People kind of love seeing the onset and the final. I reckon this is like nothing to do with what Framestore did or Steph or anything on Guardians. The only thing that still remains confusing for the general public is, in some breakdowns, you know, these visual effects studios are match moving actors so intricately and meticulously for shots for composite, you know, for all the reasons that you need that. Sometimes in their breakdowns, they include the match moving, you know, digital model of the character, who may or may not be a digi-double in the end, but often isn't. And I think sometimes the general public thinks that those match-moving models means that the character, Tom Cruise or whoever, was replaced. And this is my only little bugbear when they show those breakdowns and the general public sees them and they go, oh, he's CG. And I'm like, no, he's not actually CG. It's just a match move. Yeah. But anyway, sorry, that's a total.
No, but I know what you mean, because it's unfortunately that happens because they're doing a projection. They're basically projecting the footage into real geometry so that they can use it for deep compositing, so that they can put the particles and they can put the proper occlusion of layers of CG. And I absolutely agree with you, because no one knows what deep compositing is, no one knows what occlusion is, and so it becomes really confusing for sure. But but hey, that's part of the studio. They need to do a better job on that as well. You know, like I think
I've just seen it happen. That's all. When people see that, and God, by the way, it's often partial digi-double or legs replaced.
A lot of times it's like comes in and comes out. Like we're gonna talk about the oner in a bit. You know, where they go into CG, out of CG, into the CG, out of CG. They go in and out seamlessly. So I mean, there's a full track for sure for the whole body the whole time.
Yes. And here's the only other thing about a breakdown. When I talked to one of Framestore's soups, on Guardians 3, Alexi, he's an amazing supervisor, has done many Marvel films. He mentioned that internally for Framestore, because he'd worked on a bunch of these Guardians films, he made this little like tribute to Rocket as if he was Groot. And I was really hoping they might release that. It's in one of the articles I published on Befores and Afters, but it sounded so beautiful, and I just thought that was really nice, and I think that's how important Rocket and Groot, frankly, have been to some of these visual effects artists. So anyway, Framestore, please release that. That would be super cool. Yeah. Okay, let's turn to, you know, we wanted to mention Rocket and his friends there because it's such a huge part of the film. I think another standout visual effects moment in the film is this oner fight on the ship, in the ship corridor, ship hallway. That just, it almost feels like it comes out of nowhere, but it's just so spectacular. It's a sequence, of course, overseen by Stephane Ceretti, and you know there's a huge stunt coordination part of this, huge on-set special effects part of this, and then it was orchestrated by Weta Effects, who just did some incredible A, stitching, B, CG characters, and then melding of live action and visual effects work. There's something like 17 stitches in that oner, Hugo, which is so awesome. I mean, what was your reaction like when you saw that in the film?
Well, first of all, I'll start with just the emotional reaction and how I reacted, and then I go to the stats of this. So, first of all, yes, you're right. It comes out of nowhere. The music starts, and you're kind of thinking they're going in slow motion on their big reveal, and you're like, oh, okay, it's going to be like a fight scene or something. But then it just goes on and on and on and on. It's like 2.5 minutes long, and you're like, oh my God. And it just gets bigger and better and better and bigger and more wide, and it's like super wide. Like the lenses are so wide that you literally go across millimeters out of punches, and you go millimeters out of the action. It is some of the most impressive visual effects sequences I've seen in a very long time. For me, I feel like this is, if anything, if the Guardian Galaxy manages to get nominated to the Oscar, it most likely will be because of this sequence, I feel, and probably because of Rocket as well. I feel like this sequence is a perfect blend of action, fighting choreography, CG, compositing, and acting. Like the whole thing is just perfection, and the music choice, of course, as well. The whole thing is just, and it's funny as well. It's super funny. There's like some hilarious moments. You just have to watch it time and time again to discover more and more little things and little jokes that are throughout the whole shot. Now, you're right. Like, this is definitely a standout moment. I was not expecting it, and I was blown away by it.
Yeah. I also love the song "No Sleep Till Brooklyn," which is Beastie Boys. A really interesting thing that Guy Williams, the VFX suit from Weather Effects, told me in an interview, again, this is on Befores and Afters, was that James Gunn had in his head that this sequence, this oner, could be a little bit messy. And his inspiration for that was this amazing film, I'm sure you've seen, Hugo, called The Villainess, which John Wick gets a bit of inspiration from, I think. And in that film, there's a bunch of long takes, one takes, and they regularly use whip pans. And because it's lots of fighting, martial arts type fighting or driving, it's sort of, in The Villainous, you kind of get away with that messiness and grunginess.
Yeah.
And I think when Steph and Guy Williams heard that from James, they sort of went, oh yeah, you're saying that, but we don't think you're going to want messy stitches, effectively. So they never did such messy stitches. I mean, there's plenty of great whip pans, but that's really interesting inspiration, because I can feel that in the sequence, but it is much more perfect than The Villainess.
It is. And also, like in The Villainess, most of the shots are POVs, that you're actually watching through the eyes of the character, and you even see the arms and the gun, and you see the so it's a slightly different approach, because which in a way it's really difficult to do, because you have to mount the camera, then you have to have the arms of the actors in the front. It becomes really difficult. But yes, it has some, I don't want to disrespect the film, but it has some dodgy moments.
But it works for the aesthetic, doesn't it?
It works
That's
perfectly.
the point.
Yeah, it works really well, and it's a low-budget film, relatively low budget compared to a Marvel movie, of course. But no, so let's break this down. So this is 2 minutes and a half, but in reality, it's not 2 minutes and a half, because it was shot at 120 frames per second.
Oh yeah.
Because they, of course, wanted to ramp up and slow down at a notice so that they could hit the song. Because that's the problem. Like, you have a song, you have beats to hit. You're never going to be able to hit these beats by choreographing, because it will always miss certain things. And then as soon as you miss something, then it just like becomes worse and worse as it goes on through the music. It just gets more out of sync. So you have to shoot it at 120 frames, so you can speed up a little bit and then slow down a little bit if you need it to hit certain beats. And this means that you need to rotoscope and paint and match move at 120 frames. So now we are not doing a 2 minute and a half sequence. We're now doing 15 minutes sequence. So if you start thinking about the frames that we have to handle, this is the equivalent of a 15-minute long film sequence, single shot sequence. Not a single shot, of course, because it's 18 plates that are merged, but still, it is a lot of data, all in 4K IMAX. It's a lot of frames, a lot of rotor, a lot of paint to just be able to do this. And a lot of people probably are thinking to themselves, oh, but why didn't they just shot it normally, exactly to the timings, and so they didn't have to do all this extra rotor work? Well, if you've worked in visual effects like I have in the past, you never work with retime plates, ever. You never do that. Because if you try to work with retime plates, first, the tracking will not work, because you are basically faking the camera move, and then the tracking software will just go bananas trying to track it. B, if any editorial change is made in the future,
that's the big thing.
You have to do the whole thing again. You have to literally do the entire thing again. And so sometimes people get into the trap of locking down. I remember working in commercials many times at the mill where they would conform the plates with the retimes already burned in, and that would become a major issue because they would have to redo and redo and redo. So that is the main thing. So from a visual effects point of view, this is a nightmare because it's really a lot of data to handle. But then also from the shooting point of view, and really shout out to the fight coordinator and the stunt coordinator for this. We have, I hope I don't butcher it, but it's Wayne Dalglish, I think that's his name, the fight choreographer, and the stunt coordinator is Heidi Moneymaker as well, and then the post-viz by James Baker. And I think they also are so integral part of this entire section. 5 months of planning and no motion control. Because people probably thought, oh, you can just put a motion control there.
Yeah.
But it's just too dangerous. A motion control, well, first of all, it would be too static. It would become very hard to make something so orchestrated and something so fluid. That's the first problem of motion control. But then also the second part is the motion control is too dangerous. Motion controls are very heavy, very hard, and can kill someone if they hit someone. It's very dangerous to be in such a small corridor with a motion control gimbal. You know, it's just like, it would have been just way too dangerous, you know.
Yes, I think the motion control side of it was not really considered, partly also because it's a very frenetic, action sequence where, because of Groot's arms and because Rocket's running around and there's biomechanical crustaceans getting sliced and shot, and there's lots of stunt work, as you mentioned. So it just suits a more... There's actually a very fluid camera movement, of course, during it. Yeah. And part of that comes from the fact that they could shoot with a very small camera body.
Yeah.
So they could get in there and shoot things. But I just think the way the camera moves around virtual camera and real camera is almost balletic.
Yeah.
And a motion control feel might not have had that same balletic feel. No,
it wouldn't. And I think also this is probably my favorite use of a full frame camera, because we are in there. I'm not entirely sure what lens it was used, but I am assuming this is like an 18 millimeter or even lower than that. It is extremely wide. We're talking probably 18 millimeter, 16 millimeter, maybe even lower, maybe even 12. I'm not entirely sure because I couldn't find... The whole thing with this is that it's a really perfect illustration of how cool it is, a full frame, wide lens. Especially when they hit Nebula in the face and her face breaks and goes down. We are probably inches away from her head, and we're inches away from the actual fist that hit it. It's really impressive work. And it happens again with Mantis, when Mantis jumps and swings from the Groot's extended arms, and then she lands on top of a guard. This is all, of course, all stitched and with multiple takes, and of course, digital replacements and switches from digital Mantis to real Mantis and then digital Mantis back again. We are so close to her. We are so close. We're we see her legs and we see her arms and we see then the other arm crossing. I feel like this is like a commercial for a full frame from camera.
Yes,
it's insane.
And that's villainess-like, as you had mentioned, with that sort of almost POV style. But yes, the way Weta has made decisions about how much of a character, an actor, part of an actor to keep, and when to do the digital takeover. Look, they're experts at it. They do it many times in other films. But here, oh my God, actually there's no breakdown out yet that shows all of this sequence. But they did show it at SIGGRAPH, and they have released a few short ones, which we'll be playing while we chat. If you get a chance to have a look at the decisions they had to make about which parts to keep and make that work again with those ramp ups and ramp downs and the timing, it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible, this sequence. It's going to be one, I think, that people will watch and rewatch like they used to do on DVDs, it's one of those sequences people will bring up as YouTube clips, for years to come. I think it's that kind of sequence.
And they really hit it really well, because on the trailers, when the film first was announced, there's a few shots of this oner, especially
Yeah.
Quill with the guns, and he's like really wide, and you just think, oh, that's a really cool shot, because that's really wide shot with him with the two guns, and you think, oh, that's a really awesome shot, and then you watch this, because they really hide it a lot. Like, it's not even on the trailers, most of it, and yeah, it's fascinating, and it's really, really well made. I feel like I really, really hope this team gets a lot of nominations, gets a lot of love for this production, because they did an outstanding job, and I hope it gets into the Bake Off. I really hope it gets nominated, because this entire sequence plus the entire character animation part of the film is really outstanding. And of course, that's not even the film has so much more. We can't.
Oh my God.
We can't be here for 3 hours, because the podcast would be longer than the actual episode. But there's so much more. There's entire environments. There's entire planets. There's entire things that we're not even going to get to the time to discuss it. But yeah. But I guess with that in mind, I really wanted to talk to you about the way that this is shown in terms of behind the scenes, though. I think that could be a good...
Okay, I just want to give everyone the warning. I think this is the rant warning. I think we're here.
The reason I want to segue to this is because this sequence is featured quite a few times on that behind the scenes. Of course, I'm talking about the behind the scenes that is on Disney Plus right now. Part of their, some of them are good, some of them are not that good, but they do this awesome 1 hour long behind the scenes for a lot of their productions.
Yeah, they're called Assembled.
Yes, exactly. And they did, some of them are quite impressive, but this one in particular, the Assembled one for the Guardian Galaxy 3 from Disney Plus, you should still go and watch it, of course. It's still quite nice, but it is fascinating to see how visual effects and CGI are completely ignored throughout the entire 60 minutes, to a point that it even sounds and looks like there's no CGI. It is absolutely baffling how this happened. It's baffling how this was allowed. I feel this is ridiculous, the way that is perceived on this behind the scenes. You watch the behind the scenes and you don't even see a breakdown. There's not even the dog, even Cosmo doesn't have a breakdown. None of it has breakdowns. None of it has behind the scenes of CG. You never see any of it. You just focus on the actors. The whole thing is just the actors and the act, like they did everything by themselves. And it just makes me so mad of watching this behind the scenes. It is just pointless to do this. Why do this?
Well, okay. I mean, we're talking about it, so I agree with you, Hugo. Except I just want to do two caveats. I think James Gunn is actually a really good advocate for visual effects.
Absolutely,
and generally welcoming of the process.
Did not say that.
Just to make that clear,
he does that a lot on his Twitter. He's posting all the time. Now I don't know, but this is not him. He didn't do this. It wasn't him. So
this particular Assembled, for example, doesn't include a Steph interview. Now there are sometimes reasons for this, right? There's a production crew on big films that are known as the behind-the-scenes crew or the B-roll crew.
Yeah.
And the whole point is for them to make a doco almost before the film is released.
Yeah.
Now, the end doco ends up having final shots from the film, and sometimes they have breakdowns and whatnot, but in this one they don't. So I do understand how sometimes these documentaries feel very much only about, or come from only about on-set interviews with actors or the director, and then only the B-roll, right? And they don't include the post-production stage because they're not made in the post-production stage. They're made as the film is being made.
Yeah, I know.
Why this doco doesn't seem to work in the spirit of Guardians 3 is because visual effects is integral to the making of Guardians 3. Yeah. Curiously, there's nothing on the virtual production shoot for Rocket and his friends. Yet there is actually like a YouTube featurette about it. So I was curious about that. Yes, the one is there and they definitely talk about stunts and fight choreography. There's heaps of B-roll with blue screen and wire work and all this kind of stuff. It as you say, Hugo, it just feels a bit weird watching it, because by the time you get to like 45 minutes in, you're like, oh, well, we're going to see some visual effects stuff now.
We're not.
And
no.
then nothing.
We're not. Man, don't get me wrong. I understand that. I know that it's done before. Sometimes there's no breakdowns. I know. I extensively talk about this on an article I recently wrote for the Creative Block. I wrote this big article, and I mentioned this a lot, that back in the day, in the past, we would have more these productions, these documentaries on the Blu-rays and the DVDs would be made on time. You would have had. That's why sometimes you would have interviews with the VFX supervisors, and sometimes you would even have, like famously from Twister and from The Day After Tomorrow, like you would actually see artists on the box. You would see artists on a computer.
They followed
the post, and they would show everything. And why the hell is that not happening? Because these days, if anything, it's even faster to do this now. It's even faster. You can definitely get a team up to Framestore, a team up to Weta, film a few computers, film a few people pointing screens, get some breakdowns. I can assure you Weta and Framestore would do their best to do the breakdowns as fast as they could to deliver them to the edit. They could have waited a few days and then released the fucking thing. I just get so mad at this. And this has to end. This has to end. That's why I'm like being so upset. We need to stop this. We need to shout it out. It needs to be stopped. People need to complain about this so they don't do it again. Why is Steph not on the documentary? I'm not saying this because he's a pal of ours on the show. I'm saying this, why is he not there? He should be there. Not to mention the stunts people should be. There's other people that are missing on the film.
Yeah.
We spend the entire documentary just watching the actors. And I know they are the stars, but that behind the scene should be a group effort. It should show everyone that was involved on the film. Yeah. And I feel like 1 hour of this should have other people of the production in the film. It's just it's unforgiven. I
always
don't
like
think
to balance.
You
I
can
always like to balance our rants a little bit. I would say that the realities sometimes of making these films are so big that there's a side of this where the B-roll crew can capture an actor because they can have some downtime. I imagine Steph, for example, was like busy 24/7 and possibly couldn't even have time to sit down for interviews. That's one. The other thing is there's been a bit of a history of Marvel releasing for their films maybe 1 or 2 5 to 10 minute visual effects interviews that go on YouTube as separate kind of things. They're almost to get ahead of the story about some visual effects moment in the film. And there is one for this film. Steph talked about Rocket and about the oner in a featurette. So they do highlight visual effects, but for an hour-long thing to not kind of properly mention it. Like, I'm not actually sure visual effects was actually mentioned. I'm probably wrong.
No, there wasn't.
I'm probably wrong that there's some VFX comment or something like that.
And
it doesn't feel right, that's all.
No, it doesn't feel right, and it just helps. This just puts more fuel to the fire already existing on the internet that everyone hates CGI. This just helps. Because you watch the entire 1 hour behind the scenes, and visual effects is so not mentioned that most people watch it, they're like, oh, they didn't even mostly use them. It's mostly on set. Because most people don't know how this is done. And so if you're doing this behind the scene, I'm sure people are gonna hate what I'm gonna say, but I think this was on purpose. I think this was on purpose because CGI has such a bad name currently on the internet. They on purpose didn't want to mention it so that the film, the documentary, would not be trashed on the internet. I feel like this is a big problem. This is a problem happening on Twitter. This is a problem happening on our community right now. But they should have had the courage to go beyond that and think about the future, thinking that this behind the scenes will be there on Disney Plus for years to come, and now it's incomplete. And that's shocking for me. And it's the same thing with the Blu-ray as well. The Blu-ray also hardly mentions visual effects and CGI. The extras, there's no proper visual effects commentary. This film could not be done without VFX. I'm just gonna say this because it's true. You could not do this film without visual effects. I know you can't do it without the actor, but you definitely can't do this without visual effects. It's not possible. Yeah. This film would not be possible. And so if it's not possible, where the fuck are they? I just get so upset with this. I get so mad at this. I just... What is Marvel doing? What is Disney doing? Why don't they wake up and just become normal? I'm gonna upset now.
Yes, Hugo, we're all with you. The only and it's not a defense of it. The only thing I have perceived with previous productions, probably not even this one, is that there's almost a budget for these kind of, as I mentioned, B-roll, behind-the-scenes crews. And the budget actually is about finishing this film, doco, before the film is filmed, right? And then you add in the footage. It sounds ridiculous,
it's
but that
lazy.
Is kind
it's
of what
lazy.
Happens.
If you ask any visual effects company, they would do the breakdown for free. It's lazy. They would have done the breakdown for free. Every visual effects company in the world would even get a camera. They have cameras in their facilities. They would film and interview themselves, the visual effects providers, and then send the footage. This all could have been done with no extra cost. That's just laziness. They just don't want to get into that problem. They don't want to feature it. They just want anyway. I'm gonna shut up now. But at least you got to see, I'm gonna get a positive out of this, Ian. I'm gonna get a positive out of this behind the scenes. At least you got to see a lot of stuffies. I guess that's the only positive I can get from this. You got to see all the nice stuffies they made throughout the whole production, which I know you probably enjoyed very much.
Man, I sound like I've got a problem. I think I do. Yeah, no, they made stuffies for Lila and Teefs and Floor and, of course, Rocket. And they're well featured in that featurette, in that assembled doco. It's very cool to see. They are really cool to see.
I love that's my favorite moment of your interview with Stephane Ceretti on the Before and Afters article. So when he's really, really worried when Chris Pratt asks for the stuffy of Rocket because he wants to be more emotionally attached to the scene when he's on the operating table. And they're doing this. I can imagine Steph there. Everyone is doing this emotional scene. Everyone is crying. Oh my God, it's so sad. And then Steph is just looking. Oh my God, I have to replace the hands in CG now because his hands are going into the stuffy. Now I have to do a full hand replacement of Chris Pratt's hands. He's not thinking about the emotional tone of the film. He's just thinking of all that fur going into the fingers.
Oh my God, I know. Actually, that's a good thing to point out is we've only talked about essentially 2 or 3 aspects of the film.
I know.
Steph and his team are just overseeing so many things, and we haven't got time to talk about Cosmo the dog, amazingly done again by Framestore, but also wetter effects for some shots.
Man, wait. Cosmo is my favorite part of this entire film, just because. It is we need to just at least mention for a few seconds. I love the oner, yes, but Cosmo looks exactly like my old dog that I used to have, Pammy. So it makes me really sad to watch the Cosmo as well. But it is not only some of the funniest parts, especially the bad dog, good dog. That is some of the funniest things, and any dog owner knows exactly and can attach to that thing. But my God, it is probably the most realistic dog I've ever seen in CG ever. It is photoreal. Yeah. Absolutely photoreal. They did an amazing job.
The way that they didn't make it cartoony and kept it dog-like, but then somehow just by the emotion of the scene or the look that it might give or a glint in the eye just worked so well. I must say, man, Pammy, my dog that died a few years ago, the face was exactly like Cosmo.
Exactly. And I can tell you, man, as a dog owner, that I was usually was very close to Pammy's face for my dog, always giving a petting and looking at her face, laughing, or with the mouth open or with the nose. This is absolutely bang on perfect to the dog of that nature. The nose, the texturing, the eyes, the fur. They did such an amazing job that I was watching this and I could not believe my eyes. When I watched this on the cinema the first time, I was blown away by it. And then the breakdown becomes even more realistic. I just feel that they did an astonishing job. Not only to mention that it's really funny. He has a cosmonaut suit. He's like an astronaut. It's really funny and it's really cute. And the sequences with him with the pebble and the whole thing is really funny. He's like a really important figure on the end of the film as well. Basically saves them all with this telekinesis power. But it's I'm glad we just stopped a few minutes to just give some love to them, because this is outstanding work for sure, you know.
I really like the voice actor behind Cosmo, which is Maria Bakalova. She's amazing in this film called Bodies, 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 by the way. Everyone
you keep telling me about that film. I have to watch that film. You told me that it was really good.
It.
But you're right, Ian. Like, there's so much more. There's so much more.
Yeah, even more interestingly with Cosmo, we actually, of course, got a taste of Cosmo from the holiday special. And then somehow Framestore and Weta elevated Cosmo even further than that. So that was super cool work. But yes, another big studio on the film was Sony Pictures Imageworks, which did a lot of work in Counter Earth and on that organic
the Argoscope
planet.
The Argoscope. It's such a funny planet, Argoscope.
And the detail, think about the detail on that organic surface inside and outside is out there. They also did some incredible work on Counter Earth with sort of like the more action sequences there and the environment builds. I mean, it's just, again,
the warlock
so
flying, the warlock flying. Oh my god, that's such an awesome sequence. In the entire warlock sequence on the beginning of the film as well, I feel like we didn't even mention that there's some outside that sequence of warlock fighting all of the Guardians of the Galaxy on the beginning of the film actually already gives you a little pointer to the oner, because there's some super wide shots on that sequence where when he's punching, you see the complete wideness of the lens. It's really cool as well. Now we can't go through the whole thing. I'll put some breakdowns if they are available while we do this show. But I hope they come out. A lot of them come out. I hope so. but this film is packed to the bone. It's 2.5 hours, and I think there's 3,000 visual effect shots on this film. 3,000. It's quite a lot.
Yes, very special film and special visual effects work by so many studios. Hugo, we're going to have to wrap it up there, but it's been fun talking about it. I really want to wish James Gunn and Steph the best with what they're doing now. And as always, we can't make these episodes possible without people watching on YouTube, our Patreon supporters, and our sponsors. So thank you so much again to them.
Thank you.
Hugo, it's been a blast talking about this amazing film.
Cool, man. Thank you so much. See you all later.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.